Hello everyone. Welcome to Mr. Midnight True Crime Stories. I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep. So before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. There are crimes that happen in darkness, on empty streets where strangers meet strangers and violence erupts without warning. Those crimes make headlines. They spark fear. They make people lock their doors and avoid shadows. But tonight, we're going to talk about a different kind of violence. The kind that happens behind closed doors. The kind that festers in homes where love is supposed to live. The kind committed not by strangers, but by people who were trusted. People who shared meals, bedrooms, lives. People who promised to protect, to cherish, to keep safe. These weren't crimes committed in back alleys or parking garages. They happened in living rooms, in kitchens, in bedrooms where children slept. They were carried out by husbands, wives, lovers, parents. By people who smiled in family photos and attended neighborhood barbecues. By people who seemed ordinary until the moment they became monstrous. Tonight, you'll hear 5 stories. A mother systematically erased by the person she once loved and the child she raised. A husband who terrorized an entire community to hide his failures. A love affair that crossed the line from passion to murder. A son trapped between protecting his mother and breaking the law. And a child whose suffering was ignored until it was too late. These stories are different, but they share something. They all show how violence can hide inside normalcy. How danger can wear a familiar face. How the people we should fear most are sometimes the ones closest to us. The names have been changed. The locations have been altered. Some details have been modified to protect privacy and respect the dead. But the patterns are real. The warning signs were real. And the consequences were devastatingly real. This isn't about sensationalism. It's about awareness. It's about understanding that evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it moves quietly, patiently, hiding behind a smile or a promise or a wedding ring. And by the time anyone notices, it's often too late. So settle in, listen carefully, and remember that these stories, as disturbing as they are, carry lessons that might one day save a life. Maybe even your own. Elena Ward was 23 when she met Thomas, and she thought she had found her future. He was 25, working in tech support while studying systems engineering at night. She was finishing her literature degree, dreaming of teaching. They met at a coffee shop near campus where she was reading Sylvia Plath, and he was debugging code on a laptop held together with electrical tape. He noticed her book first, asked if she'd ever read The Bell Jar. She had, twice. They talked for 3 hours about poetry and programming, about how both required seeing patterns in chaos. When he walked her home that night through the cold streets of Riverton Falls, New York, she felt something she hadn't felt before. Safety. Certainty. Like she'd found the person she was supposed to find. They married 2 years later in a small ceremony at her mother's house. Elena wore a simple white dress. Thomas wore his only suit. They couldn't afford a honeymoon, so they spent 3 days in a cabin upstate, reading books by the fireplace and planning their life together. They wanted children. 3, maybe 4. A house with a yard. Ordinary dreams that felt extraordinary because they were theirs. Marissa came first, then Lila 2 years later, then Sophie 3 years after that. Elena taught part-time at the community college while the girls were young, leading discussion groups about Virginia Woolf and Toni Morrison. Thomas moved up in his company, managing larger projects, traveling more. They bought a house on the edge of town, a fixer-upper with good bones and a basement that flooded every spring. From the outside, they looked like any other family. Minivan in the driveway, bikes on the lawn, birthday parties with too much cake and not enough chairs. But inside, something else was growing. Something Thomas had planted early and watered carefully over years. It started small. Comments about Elena's choices that seemed helpful but left her feeling stupid. Suggestions about how she dressed, how she organized the house, how she spoke to the children. He never yelled, never hit. He just quietly, persistently, let her know she wasn't doing things right, that she needed his guidance. That without him, she would make mistakes. When Marissa was 5, Elena wanted to enroll her in a dance class. Thomas said it was too expensive, that they needed to save money. But 2 weeks later, he bought himself a new laptop for work. When Elena questioned it, he explained that his career supported the family, that her teaching income barely covered groceries. He wasn't mean about it. He was just stating facts. And Elena, exhausted from raising 3 small children, accepted those facts without argument. When Lila started kindergarten, Elena wanted to go back to teaching full-time. Thomas said the girls needed her at home. That daycare would damage them psychologically. He showed her articles about attachment theory, about the importance of maternal presence. Elena read them and felt guilty for even considering leaving her children. She stayed home. She told herself it was the right choice. The years passed. The girls grew. And somewhere in that time, Elena began to shrink. Not physically, but in every other way. She spoke less, decided less, existed in the spaces Thomas allowed her to occupy. She told herself this was marriage. This was compromise. This was what mothers did. Then Thomas got a job offer in another state. Better pay, better title, better everything. Except it meant leaving Riverton Falls. Leaving Elena's mother, who lived 20 minutes away and helped with the girls. Leaving the college where Elena had finally returned to teaching. Leaving everything familiar. Elena said no. It was the first time she'd said no to Thomas in years, and it felt like jumping off a cliff. She said the girls were settled in school, that her mother was getting older and needed family nearby, that her career mattered too. She said it calmly, reasonably, the way she taught her students to construct arguments. Thomas listened, nodded, said he understood. Then he took the job anyway. He moved out 3 months later, saying he'd come home on weekends, that they'd make it work, that lots of families did this. But he didn't come home on weekends. He came home once a month, then every 6 weeks, then hardly at all. And when he did come home, he wasn't the same. He was distant, critical. He snapped at the girls for small things. He told Elena she'd ruined their family by being selfish. He said divorce was her fault. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning. Elena signed them without fighting. She was too tired to fight, too worn down. She just wanted peace. She got the house, primary custody of the girls, and child support that barely covered expenses. Thomas got weekends and holidays, freedom and a fresh start. That's when the real torture began. Thomas filed motion after motion. Requests to modify custody. Claims that Elena was alienating the children. Allegations that she was mentally unstable. None of it was true, but truth didn't matter. What mattered was that every motion required a response. Every response required a lawyer. Every lawyer required money Elena didn't have. She spent her savings. Borrowed from her mother. Skipped meals so the girls could eat. Lay awake at night calculating whether she could afford to keep fighting or if she should just give Thomas what he wanted. Which was everything. Which was the girls. The legal harassment was constant. Emails at 2 in the morning demanding to know why Lila's grades had dropped. Texts during work hours accusing Elena of poisoning the children against him. Calls to the school claiming Elena had missed parent-teacher conferences she'd actually attended. It was death by 1,000 cuts. Designed to exhaust her. To break her. To make her disappear. And while Thomas was doing this to Elena, he was doing something else to Marissa. Something quieter. Something more dangerous. He started calling Marissa separately from her sisters. Special calls, just for her. He'd ask about school, about friends, about mom. At first, the questions seemed normal. Then they started to shift. How was mom really doing? Did she seem stressed? Did she say bad things about dad? Marissa, 12 years old and desperate for her father's attention, answered honestly. Mom seemed sad. Mom cried sometimes. Mom said they didn't have money for new shoes. Thomas listened carefully to everything. Then he began to reframe it. He told Marissa that her mother was struggling because she'd pushed him away. That Elena had destroyed their family because she cared more about her career than her children. That Marissa was the only one mature enough to understand the truth. He made her feel special, important, like she alone could see through her mother's lies. He sent gifts, expensive headphones, designer clothes, things Elena couldn't afford. When Marissa wore them, Elena would ask where they came from. Marissa would say Dad sent them. Elena would feel a flash of anger, seeing Thomas buy their daughter's affection with money he claimed he didn't have for child support. But she wouldn't say anything. She didn't want to be the parent who badmouthed the other parent. She wanted to be better than that. Thomas was counting on that. He knew Elena. Knew she'd take the high road even as he burned bridges behind her. Knew she'd protect him from his own cruelty because she still believed, somewhere deep down, that he was the father of her children and deserved respect. Marissa started spending more time on the phone with Thomas. Less time talking to Elena. When Elena tried to connect, Marissa would roll her eyes or give one-word answers. When Elena planned mother-daughter activities, Marissa suddenly had homework or plans with friends. The distance grew, and Thomas watered it carefully, feeding Marissa carefully selected truths mixed with outright lies until she couldn't tell the difference anymore. By the time Marissa was 14, she barely spoke to her mother. She spent weekends at Thomas's place and came home sullen and angry. She told Lila and Sophie that mom was the reason dad left. That mom was selfish. That everything would be fine if mom just stopped being so difficult. Elena watched her eldest daughter disappear into Thomas's narrative. She tried talking to Marissa, tried family therapy, tried everything she could think of. But Thomas was always one step ahead, always undermining, always planting doubt. And Marissa, desperate for her father's love, chose to believe him. Because believing him meant she had a parent who valued her. And doubting him meant accepting that her father was a liar. That was too painful. So she made her mother the villain instead. The other girls noticed. Lila, always the peacemaker, tried to stay neutral. She loved her mother but didn't want to lose her father. Sophie, the youngest, mostly stayed quiet. She was only 9 and didn't fully understand why everyone was angry all the time. She just knew that home felt different now. Sad. Heavy. Like something bad was always about to happen. Elena's mother, Dorothy, watched all of this with growing alarm. She'd known Thomas for years, had welcomed him into the family, had trusted him with her daughter. But now she saw something she hadn't seen before. Or maybe she'd seen it all along and hadn't wanted to name it. Control. Manipulation. Abuse dressed up as concern. Dorothy tried talking to Elena about it. Suggested that Thomas's behavior wasn't normal. That the constant legal battles and the way he'd turned Marissa against her wasn't about co-parenting. It was about power. About punishment. About making Elena pay for daring to have boundaries. Elena knew her mother was right. But knowing and being able to act on that knowledge were different things. She was so tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of being the bad guy in her own daughter's eyes. Tired of scraping together money for lawyers while Thomas hired the best representation money could buy. She was teaching 5 classes a semester now, picking up extra shifts tutoring, and still falling behind on bills. The stress was eating her alive. She started losing weight. Not intentionally, just because eating felt like a chore she didn't have energy for. She stopped seeing friends. Stopped doing things she enjoyed. Her entire life became about survival. Get up. Get the girls to school. Teach. Come home. Make dinner. Help with homework. Respond to Thomas's latest legal filing. Sleep a few hours. Repeat. Dorothy begged her to fight back harder. To stop being so passive. To document everything Thomas was doing and take it to the court. But Elena was beyond fighting. She was just trying to hold on. Just trying to make it through one more day, one more week, one more hearing. She told herself it would get better. That Marissa would eventually see the truth. That Thomas would eventually get tired and leave her alone. She was wrong on all counts. Thomas had no intention of stopping. He'd tasted power, the ability to control Elena's life even after their divorce, and he liked it. Every motion he filed, every accusation he made, every weekend he spent poisoning Marissa against her mother, it all fed something dark in him. Something that had probably always been there, but had grown stronger with time. The need to win, to dominate, to destroy anyone who defied him. And Marissa, now 15, was fully under his influence. She didn't just dislike her mother anymore. She hated her. With the intensity only a teenager can muster, she hated everything about Elena. The way she dressed, the way she talked, the way she tried too hard to connect, the way she existed. Thomas fed that hatred. Told Marissa she was right to feel angry. That Elena had failed as a mother and as a wife. That she deserved to lose everything. And slowly, carefully, he began to plant a darker idea. That maybe Elena didn't deserve to be in their lives at all. That maybe the world would be better without her. He never said it directly. He was too smart for that. But he'd make comments about how much easier things would be if Elena wasn't constantly causing problems. How much happier everyone would be if she just disappeared. How no one would really miss her. Marissa absorbed these thoughts like poison. She was young enough to believe her father completely and old enough to act on what she believed. She started having fantasies about her mother being gone. Not dead, exactly, just gone. Moved away. Out of the picture. So she could live with her dad full-time and not have to deal with Elena's sadness and neediness and failure. Thomas knew exactly what he was doing. He was preparing Marissa. Shaping her. Turning her into a weapon he could use. Because he'd realized something important. He could harass Elena legally for years and never fully break her. But there was one thing that would destroy her completely, and that was losing her children. Not in court. In reality. Forever. The plan came together slowly. Thomas never wrote it down. Never said it out loud except in the most vague and deniable terms. But it was there, growing between him and Marissa, unspoken but understood. Elena had to go, and it had to look like she'd made that choice herself. On a Thursday night in late October, Thomas called Marissa. He was coming to Riverton Falls that weekend. He wanted to see her. They had things to discuss. Important things. Marissa agreed immediately. She'd do anything to spend time with her father. Anything to feel like the special one, the chosen one, the one who understood. Thomas arrived Friday evening. He checked into a hotel on the edge of town. He didn't go to Elena's house. Didn't see Lila or Sophie. This trip wasn't about them. This trip was about finishing what he'd started years ago. He met Marissa Saturday morning at a diner downtown. They ordered breakfast neither of them ate. Thomas talked about the future. About how Marissa would be 16 soon. Old enough to choose where she lived. Old enough to testify in court if Elena tried to fight it. He told her she could come live with him full-time. Transfer schools. Start fresh. Leave all the toxicity behind. Marissa's eyes lit up. That was all she wanted. To escape. To be free from her mother's sadness and her own guilt about hating her. Thomas smiled. Told her it could happen. But first, they had to deal with one obstacle. Elena would never let her go voluntarily. She'd fight. She'd make it ugly. She'd turn it into another court battle that would drag on for years. Unless Elena wasn't around to fight. Marissa understood. She understood in that moment exactly what her father was suggesting. And the terrible thing, the thing she would never be able to take back, is that she didn't say no. She didn't get up and walk away. She didn't defend her mother or question her father. She just sat there in that diner booth, 15 years old and full of hate, and she nodded. Thomas laid it out carefully. It had to look natural. Like suicide. Elena was depressed, everyone knew that. She was stressed, overwhelmed, drowning in debt and legal battles. No one would be surprised if she decided to end things. It would be sad, but it would make sense. They spent the rest of Saturday planning. Thomas knew Elena's schedule. Knew she'd be home alone Sunday evening after dropping Lila and Sophie at their grandmother's house for dinner. Knew she took sleeping pills sometimes when the anxiety got too bad. Knew where she kept them. Knew everything because he'd once been her husband, and some intimacies don't fade even after divorce. Sunday unfolded according to plan. Elena took the girls to Dorothy's house at 5. She'd been invited too, but she declined. She had papers to grade and wasn't feeling social. Dorothy noticed how pale she looked. How thin. She tried to convince her to stay, to eat something, to rest. But Elena just kissed her mother's cheek and said she'd be fine. She had work to do. She'd see them tomorrow. It was the last time Dorothy saw her daughter alive. Elena got home around 5:30. She made herself tea, sat at the kitchen table with student essays spread around her. She was reading about the symbolism in The Great Gatsby when she heard the front door open. She wasn't alarmed. The girls sometimes forgot things at Dorothy's house. One of them must have come back. But it wasn't Lila or Sophie who walked into the kitchen. It was Marissa, and behind her was Thomas. Elena stood up so fast her tea spilled across the essays. She demanded to know what they were doing there. Why Thomas was in her house. He wasn't supposed to be here. This wasn't his weekend. This wasn't his home. Thomas stayed calm. Said they needed to talk. Said there were things that needed to be resolved. Elena told him to leave. Told Marissa to go to her room. But neither of them moved. They just stood there, blocking the doorway. And Elena felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not anger. Not frustration. Fear. Thomas started talking about custody. About how Marissa wanted to live with him full-time. About how Elena should just let her go. Stop fighting. Stop making everything so difficult. Elena said no. Said Marissa was still a child. Said she wasn't letting her daughter move in with a man who'd spent years manipulating and abusing them both. That's when Marissa spoke. She told Elena she wasn't a child. That she knew what she wanted. That she hated living in this house with a mother who did nothing but complain and cry. That she wished Elena would just disappear. Elena felt those words like a physical blow. She looked at her daughter, at this girl she'd carried and birthed and raised, and saw a stranger. Someone Thomas had created. Someone who looked at her with genuine hatred. She tried to reach Marissa. Tried to explain that her father had been lying to her. Manipulating her. turning her against her own mother because he couldn't stand that Elena had left him. But Marissa wouldn't listen. She just kept repeating that she wanted to live with Dad, that everything was Elena's fault, that she ruined everything. Thomas let this go on for a while. Let Elena exhaust herself trying to reach a daughter who'd already been lost. Then he stepped forward, told Elena she looked tired, that maybe she should take something to help her sleep, that they could continue this conversation in the morning when everyone was calmer. Elena told him again to leave, but her voice was weaker now, shaky. She was crying. She kept looking at Marissa, begging her with her eyes to remember. Remember being small. Remember bedtime stories and birthday cakes and the way Elena used to hold her after nightmares. Remember that she was loved, that she'd always been loved. But Marissa's eyes were empty. Whatever had been there, whatever connection had once existed between mother and daughter, was gone. Thomas had killed it, and Marissa had let him. What happened next would later be reconstructed from forensic evidence and Marissa's eventual confession. But in the moment, Elena didn't understand what was happening. She thought this was just another argument, another painful confrontation. She didn't know she was living her last hour on Earth. Thomas moved closer. He was still talking in that calm voice he'd perfected over years of manipulation. He was telling Elena to sit down, to relax, to take her sleeping pills like a good girl. She kept saying no, kept backing away. But the kitchen wasn't that big, and there were two of them, and only one of her. Marissa stood by the door. She was supposed to be the lookout, the one who made sure Lila and Sophie didn't come home early. But more than that, she was there because Thomas wanted her there, wanted her implicated, wanted her bound to him by this act so she could never leave him, never tell the truth, never choose her mother over him, even in memory. Elena fought, not physically, not at first, but with words. She begged them to stop, to leave, to let her call the police. She promised she wouldn't press charges. Promised she'd let Marissa go live with Thomas if that's what she really wanted. Promised anything if they'd just leave her alone. But Thomas wasn't there to negotiate. He was there to finish this, to end the one problem that had plagued him for years. The problem of Elena's existence. Her stubborn refusal to disappear. Her insistence on being a mother to children he'd claimed as his own weapons. He grabbed her. She tried to scream. Marissa came forward then, not to help her mother, but to help her father. She held Elena's arms while Thomas forced pills down her throat. Too many pills. Enough to stop a heart. Enough to end a life. Elena choked, gasped, tried to fight free. But she was small and tired and overwhelmed, and they were determined. The pills went down. Thomas held her mouth closed until she swallowed. Then he stepped back and waited. Elena collapsed onto the kitchen floor. She was still conscious but fading. The pills were working fast. Too fast. She looked up at Marissa one last time. Not with hatred, with confusion. Like she couldn't understand how this had happened. How her daughter, her firstborn, the child she'd loved more than her own life, could stand there and watch her die. Marissa looked away. She couldn't hold her mother's gaze. Couldn't face what she was doing. Thomas had told her it would be quick. That Elena wouldn't feel much. That it would be like falling asleep. But it wasn't like that. Elena was fighting. Her body was fighting even as her mind slipped away. She was clawing at the floor, making sounds that weren't quite words. Dying hard. Thomas checked his watch. They needed to move faster. He told Marissa to help him. They carried Elena upstairs to her bedroom. She was barely moving now. The pills had done their job. They laid her on the bed, arranged her arms, made it look peaceful. Thomas pulled out a note he'd written earlier, forged in Elena's handwriting. It said all the right things. How she couldn't take it anymore. How the stress had broken her. How she loved her daughters but wasn't strong enough to keep fighting. How she hoped they'd understand. It was perfect. Detailed enough to be convincing, but vague enough to not raise questions. He placed the note on the nightstand. Put the pill bottle next to it. Checked the room one more time to make sure everything looked right. Then he took Marissa's hand and led her out of the house. Told her to go back to his hotel. To stay there until he called. To not talk to anyone. To not think about what had just happened. Marissa left. She walked through the dark streets of Riverton Falls in a daze. Her mother was dead. She'd helped kill her mother. The reality of it hadn't hit yet. Wouldn't hit for hours. For now, she was just numb. Following instructions. Doing what her father told her to do. Thomas waited 30 minutes. Then he called 911 from Elena's phone. Said he was a concerned ex-husband. That he'd stopped by to drop off some of their daughter's things and found his ex-wife unresponsive. that it looked like she'd taken pills, that there was a note. The dispatcher told him to stay on the line. He said he couldn't. He was too upset. Then he hung up and walked out of the house, leaving Elena's body for the police to find. The first responders arrived 14 minutes later. They found Elena in her bed, found the note, found the pills. They called it immediately suicide. Sad but not surprising. The responding officers had been to this house before on domestic calls during the divorce. They knew Elena had been struggling. One of them remembered her crying in the driveway once, talking about how hard everything was. This seemed like the inevitable conclusion to a story that had been heading nowhere good. Dorothy got the call at 8:30. She was cleaning up from dinner. Lila and Sophie were watching TV in the living room. The officer on the phone was gentle but direct. Elena was dead. Apparent suicide. They were so sorry. Did she want to tell the girls, or should they send someone? Dorothy's knees buckled. She sat down hard on the kitchen floor. Asked the officer to repeat what he'd said. Maybe she'd heard wrong. Maybe this was about someone else. But no, it was Elena, her daughter, the baby she'd raised and protected and loved. Dead in her bedroom. Pills. Note. Gone. She told the officer she'd handle telling the girls. Then she hung up and sat on that kitchen floor and screamed. Just once. Long and loud and full of more pain than any human should have to hold. Then she pulled herself together. Because Lila and Sophie were in the other room. And they didn't know yet. And someone had to tell them their mother was never coming home. The funeral was small. Elena hadn't had many friends left. Thomas had isolated her too thoroughly. Dorothy arranged everything. Picked the casket. Wrote the obituary. Held Lila and Sophie while they cried. Marissa didn't come. Thomas said she was too upset. That seeing her mother in a casket would traumatize her. Dorothy accepted this because what choice did she have? Her daughter was dead. Her granddaughters were destroyed. Everything was wrong, and there was no way to fix it. But something bothered Dorothy. Something she couldn't name, but felt in her bones. Elena had been sad, yes. Stressed, yes. But suicidal? Dorothy didn't believe it. Elena had been a fighter. Even when Thomas was tearing her apart, she'd kept going. For the girls. Always for the girls. She wouldn't have left them. Not voluntarily. Not like this. Dorothy called the police. Asked questions about the scene. About the note. About the timeline. The detective she spoke with was patient but firm. Everything pointed to suicide. The note was in Elena's handwriting. The pills were hers. The door was locked from the inside. There was no sign of forced entry. No indication of foul play. Sometimes, he said gently, people reach a breaking point. Sometimes they hide it well. He was sorry for her loss. Dorothy wasn't satisfied. She hired a lawyer, then a private investigator. Used money she didn't have to spare. But she couldn't let this go. Couldn't accept that Elena had given up. Had to know for sure. The private investigator was a woman named Sarah Chun. She'd been a cop for 15 years before going private. She listened to Dorothy's concerns and agreed to look into it. Not because she thought there was a case, but because Dorothy needed closure. Needed to know she'd done everything possible. Sarah started with the basics. Reviewed the police report. Looked at the crime scene photos. Read the note. On the surface, everything checked out. But she was thorough. She always was. So she dug deeper. She interviewed Elena's colleagues at the college. Her few remaining friends. Her doctor. Built a picture of Elena's last months. What she found was a woman under incredible stress, but still functioning. Still teaching. Still parenting. Still fighting her ex-husband in court. Depressed, probably. But actively suicidal? The evidence wasn't there. Sarah looked into Thomas next. His finances. His travel records. His digital footprint. Found he'd been in Riverton Falls the weekend Elena died. Checked into a hotel Saturday morning. Checked out Monday afternoon. That aligned with his story about dropping off Marissa's things. But it also gave him opportunity. She tracked down the hotel's security footage. Saw Thomas arriving Saturday. Saw Marissa meeting him in the parking lot Sunday morning. Saw them leave together. Saw Marissa return alone Sunday evening, visibly shaken. Saw Thomas return much later, calm and composed. That was interesting. The timeline didn't quite match Thomas's statement. He'd said he went to Elena's house around 8. Found her unresponsive. Called 911. But the footage showed him returning to the hotel after 9. More than an hour after the 911 call was placed. Why would he go back to his hotel before calling for help? Sarah pulled Elena's phone records. Found the 911 call had been placed from Elena's phone, but tower data showed the phone was still at her house when the call was made. If Thomas had found Elena unresponsive and left immediately to call from his car because he was too upset, as he'd claimed, the phone wouldn't have been at the house. It would have been with him. Small discrepancies. Maybe meaningless. Or maybe not. Sarah went back to the crime scene photos. Studied them carefully. Something about the way Elena was positioned bothered her. Too neat. Too peaceful. People who overdose on sleeping pills don't usually arrange themselves nicely in bed. They collapse wherever they are. In bathrooms. On floors. Slumped over furniture. But Elena was perfectly centered on her bed. Arms at her sides. Like someone had placed her there. She looked at the pill bottle. Full prescription filled 3 days before Elena died. Now empty. That was a lot of pills to swallow. Especially for someone who'd have started feeling effects after the first handful. The gag reflex would have kicked in. She would have choked. Vomited. Unless someone was forcing them down her throat. Sarah requested an autopsy review. The medical examiner had ruled the death a suicide based on the overdose and the note. But he'd done a standard autopsy, not a detailed one. There'd been no reason to look for signs of force. No reason to check for defensive wounds or bruising. It was an open and shut case. But Sarah asked him to look again. Look closer. Look for anything that didn't fit the narrative. He found it in Elena's throat. Minor abrasions consistent with something being forced past the gag reflex. He found it in her wrists. Faint bruising, almost invisible, like someone had held her arms. He found it under her fingernails. Traces of her own skin cells, suggesting she'd been clawing at something. Maybe the floor. Maybe trying to get away. None of it was definitive. All of it could be explained away. But taken together, it painted a different picture. Not suicide. Murder staged to look like suicide. Sarah brought everything to the police. The detective who'd originally handled the case reviewed her findings. He was skeptical at first, but the evidence was compelling. Enough to reopen the investigation. They brought Thomas in for questioning. He came willingly. Played the grieving ex-husband. Said he was happy to help however he could. He stuck to his story. He'd found Elena unresponsive. Called 911. Waited for help. He loved her once. He was devastated by her death. But his story had holes. Why had he gone back to the hotel? Why was there a gap between finding Elena and calling for help? Why had Marissa been with him that day? Thomas had answers. He'd been in shock. Hadn't known what to do. Drove back to the hotel to compose himself before calling. Marissa had wanted to spend time with him. He hadn't wanted to involve her in this tragedy. The detective let him go. Didn't have enough to hold him yet. But he was watching now. Waiting. They pulled Thomas's phone records. Found calls to Marissa. Dozens of them. Long calls. Late night calls. Calls that happened during school hours when Marissa should have been in class. They pulled her records too. Found deleted messages. Recovered them. Read conversations that made their blood run cold. Thomas had been planning this for months. Feeding Marissa's hatred. Isolating her from reality. Preparing her to be his accomplice. The messages were careful. Coded. Deniable. But the intent was clear. Elena had to go. And Marissa was going to help make that happen. They brought Marissa in. Interviewed her with Dorothy present. She was 16 now. Still legally a minor. Still living with Thomas in his new state. Still very much under his control. At first, she denied everything. Said her father was innocent. That her mother had killed herself. That she wasn't there. Didn't know anything. But the detective was patient. He showed her the evidence. The timeline. The messages. The forensics. Told her they knew she'd been there. Knew she'd helped. Told her that lying now would only make things worse. Marissa broke. Not all at once. Slowly. Over hours. She cried. She denied. She defended her father. But eventually, the truth came out. Piece by piece. How Thomas had convinced her. How they'd planned it together. How she'd held her mother while Thomas forced pills down her throat. How they'd carried her upstairs. How they'd staged it. How she'd walked away and left her mother to die. She said she didn't mean for it to happen. That she thought her father just wanted to scare Elena. To make her back off. She didn't think he'd actually kill her. But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. She'd known exactly what was happening. She'd just chosen her father over her mother. Chosen hate over love. Chosen murder over morality. Dorothy listened to all of this from behind a two-way mirror. Listened to her granddaughter confess to killing her daughter. Heard Marissa say she hated Elena. That Elena deserved it. That she was glad it was over. Dorothy left the police station and vomited in the parking lot. Then she sat in her car and cried until she had no tears left. Her daughter was dead. Her granddaughter was a murderer. Her family was destroyed beyond repair. Thomas was arrested 3 days later, charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy, tampering with evidence, a list of charges that would keep him in prison for the rest of his life if convicted. Marissa was charged as well, as a minor, but charged nonetheless. Murder 2. Conspiracy. The prosecutor argued she'd been old enough to know what she was doing, old enough to stop it, old enough to call for help. She'd made choices. Those choices had consequences. The trial took 8 months to reach court. Thomas fought every step, hired expensive lawyers, claimed innocence, said Elena had killed herself, and now he was being railroaded by a system that wanted to blame someone. The note was real. Elena had been depressed. This was a tragedy, yes, but not a crime. But the evidence was overwhelming. The forensics, the timeline, the messages, Marissa's confession. It all pointed to premeditated murder. Calculated, cold, executed with precision. The defense tried to paint Marissa as an unreliable witness. Said she was traumatized and confused. That she'd been manipulated by police into confessing to something she didn't do. But the jury didn't buy it. They saw the messages. Heard the recordings Sarah had uncovered of Thomas coaching Marissa on what to say. Saw through the lies. Thomas was convicted on all counts. Sentenced to life without parole. He showed no emotion when the verdict was read. Just sat there, silent, as if this were happening to someone else. Marissa's trial was separate, shorter. The prosecution was gentler with her, acknowledging she'd been manipulated by her father. But they still argued she bore responsibility. She'd had chances to stop this, to save her mother. She'd chosen not to. The defense argued diminished capacity, that she'd been brainwashed, that she was as much a victim as Elena, that sending a 16-year-old to prison for life would serve no purpose. The jury deliberated for 2 days, came back with a compromise. Guilty of voluntary manslaughter, not murder. Recognition that she'd participated but with significant coercion. She was sentenced to 15 years in a juvenile facility, with possibility of parole after 7. Dorothy attended every day of both trials, sat in the front row, looked at Thomas and Marissa, and tried to understand how this had happened. How the man she'd welcomed into her family had turned into a monster. How her granddaughter had become his weapon. She never found answers that satisfied her. Just the cold reality that evil exists, that it hides in families, that it can turn love into hatred and children into killers. Lila and Sophie went to live with Dorothy after the trials. Sophie was 12 now. Lila was 14. Both of them were in therapy. Both of them struggling to process what had happened. Their mother was dead. Their father was in prison. Their sister had helped kill their mother. How does a child survive that? Dorothy did her best. She sold her house and bought a bigger one so the girls could each have their own room. She took them to therapy twice a week. She held them when they cried. She let them be angry. She tried to give them the stability and love they desperately needed. Sophie adjusted better than Lila. She was younger when Elena died. Her memories were less sharp. She remembered her mother as kind and sad. She remembered being held, being loved, but she didn't remember the worst of the fighting. Didn't remember the way Marissa had turned. Didn't fully understand the depth of the betrayal. Lila remembered everything. She'd been old enough to see it all, to watch Marissa pull away, to hear the fights between her parents, to feel the tension in the house like a living thing. She felt guilty for not realizing something was wrong, for not protecting her mother, for not somehow preventing what happened. Dorothy told her again and again that none of this was her fault, that she was a child, that she couldn't have known. But guilt doesn't respond to logic. Lila carried it anyway, carries it still. They don't talk about Marissa. Dorothy suggested family therapy that would include her, but both girls refused. They don't want to see her, don't want to hear her excuses, don't want to forgive. Maybe someday, but not now, not yet, probably not ever. Elena Ward's story ends in a cemetery in Riverton Falls. Her headstone is simple, just her name and dates. Dorothy comes every week, brings flowers, talks to her daughter about the girls, about how they're healing, about how much she misses her. The case made national news for a while. Another story of domestic violence ending in murder. Experts weighed in about parental alienation, about how manipulation can warp a child's mind, about warning signs that no one sees until it's too late. But eventually the news moved on. Other stories, other tragedies, other families destroyed by violence. What remains are the people left behind. Dorothy, raising her granddaughters, and living with the knowledge that her son-in-law murdered her daughter, Lila and Sophie, navigating their teenage years without their mother. And somewhere in a juvenile facility, Marissa, sitting with what she's done, what she can never undo. The lesson, if there is one, is this: psychological abuse leaves no bruises, but it kills just the same. It kills trust. It kills relationships. It kills the bonds between parents and children. And sometimes, it kills people. Literally. Finally. Permanently. Elena Ward couldn't protect herself from Thomas. Couldn't escape his manipulation even after divorce. Couldn't save her daughter from his poison. She tried. She fought. But in the end, she lost. Because the system that was supposed to protect her didn't see the danger until she was already dead. That's the first story. Take a breath. We're going to move to something different now. From psychological warfare to a different kind of deception. From an urban setting to rural England. From a family torn apart to a community terrorized by one man's desperation. Edward Hale had been a farmer his entire life. It was all he knew. All his father had known. All his grandfather had known. The farm in Ashcombe Vale had been in his family for 3 generations. 200 acres of rolling pastures and crop fields, bordered by stone walls older than anyone could remember. But farming hadn't been profitable for years. Decades, really. The margins were too thin. The weather was too unpredictable. The market prices were controlled by corporations that didn't care if small farms survived. Edward's father had managed by taking out loans, by mortgaging the land, by working 18-hour days and hoping for the best. When Edward inherited the farm at 35, he inherited the debt too. Hundreds of thousands of pounds. Debts that had compounded over years. Debts that were now due. Edward tried to make it work. He diversified crops, started a small organic vegetable business, opened the farm to tours. His wife, Rose, helped as much as she could while raising their 3 children. But they were drowning. Slowly but surely sinking under the weight of bills they couldn't pay and interest they couldn't afford. By the time Edward was 42, he was desperate. The bank was threatening foreclosure. He was behind on every payment. Behind on taxes. Behind on equipment leases. Behind on life. He started drinking. Not heavily at first. Just a pint at the pub after work to take the edge off. But 1 pint became 3. 3 became 6. He'd come home late, smelling like beer, and Rose would bite back the things she wanted to say, because what was the point? The farm was failing. Their marriage was failing. Everything was falling apart. Edward had affairs. Small ones. Brief ones. Women he met at agricultural conferences or in town. He told himself it wasn't cheating, not really, because Rose barely talked to him anymore. Because their marriage was over in everything but name. Because he needed something, anything, to feel less like a failure. Rose knew. She always knew. But she stayed. For the children. For the farm. For the life they'd built together, even if that life was crumbling. She stayed and she endured, and she told herself things would get better. They had to get better. They didn't. The breaking point came when Peter Langford made an offer. Peter owned the neighboring farm. 500 acres of prime land. He'd bought out 2 other farms in the area over the past decade. He was building an empire while everyone else was failing. And now he wanted Edward's land. The offer was fair. More than fair. Enough to pay off the debts with money left over. Enough to start fresh somewhere else. Enough to save himself. But accepting it meant admitting defeat. Meant ending the family legacy. Meant telling his father, dying in a care home, that he'd lost everything. Edward couldn't do it. His pride wouldn't let him. So he said no. Told Peter the farm wasn't for sale. Would never be for sale. Peter shrugged. Said the offer would stand if Edward changed his mind. Then he left. And Edward was alone with his pride and his debt and his dying farm. That's when Edward had an idea. A desperate, stupid, ultimately deadly idea. If he couldn't save the farm legitimately, maybe he could save it another way. Through sympathy. Through fear. Through making himself the victim instead of the failure. He started small. Anonymous, threatening letters. Sent to himself. Delivered to his own mailbox. They said things like, leave the Vale and sell or suffer. He showed them to Rose. To the police. Acted frightened and confused. Who would threaten him? Why? The police investigated. Found nothing. Told him to be careful. To keep the doors locked. To report anything suspicious. Edward escalated. He killed one of his own sheep. Slit its throat and left it in the pasture where Rose would find it. She screamed when she saw it. called Edward in tears. Someone was targeting them. This was serious. Dangerous. The community rallied. Neighbors checked in, offered to help with security, set up cameras. Everyone in Ashcombe Vale knew about the Hales now, knew they were being terrorized, sympathized with them. Edward loved it, loved the attention, loved being the center of the story instead of the punchline. He kept going. More dead animals, smashed windows, graffiti on the barn walls. Each incident carefully staged, each one designed to build fear without causing real damage. He became obsessed with maintaining the narrative, spent more time planning his fake terror campaign than working the farm. Rose was genuinely frightened now, wanted to sell, wanted to leave. But Edward convinced her they couldn't let the terrorists win, had to stand their ground, had to fight. She believed him. Everyone believed him. Because why would someone terrorize themselves? What kind of person would do that? Edward Hale. That's what kind. The plan was working perfectly. The community was on his side. The bank had delayed foreclosure proceedings out of sympathy. Local news covered his story. He was invited to speak at town meetings about rural crime. He was someone important, someone who mattered. But the lies required constant maintenance. He had to keep creating incidents, had to keep the fear fresh. And that meant escalating. He bought a burner phone, used it to send threatening texts to his own phone, used it to call and breathe heavily on the line before hanging up. Rose was terrified, wanted to take the children and leave. But Edward convinced her to stay, promised he'd protect her, promised this would end soon. He was thinking about how to end it, how to create a final incident dramatic enough to cement his victim's status permanently. Something that would make the bank forgive his debts, make the community raise money for him, make everyone forget he was a failure. He decided on a bomb, not a real one that could actually kill someone, just something that would make noise, create smoke, look dangerous. He researched it obsessively, watched videos, read articles, bought materials at different stores so no one would notice. He built the device in his workshop. It was crude but effective, enough explosive to make a loud bang and produce some fire, not enough to actually destroy anything. He planned to plant it in Rose's car. She'd turn the key. It would explode. She'd be shaken but unhurt. And he'd be the husband of a woman who nearly died. The ultimate victim. He installed it one night after Rose went to bed, connected it to the ignition, tested the wiring. Everything was set. Tomorrow morning, when Rose left for her job at the primary school, the bomb would go off. The police would investigate. They'd finally take this seriously. They'd have to. Edward went to bed that night feeling proud of himself, feeling clever. This was going to work. This was going to save everything. The next morning, Rose got up early, kissed the children goodbye, got in her car. Edward watched from the kitchen window, waited for the bang. It came, louder than he expected. A flash of orange flame, smoke pouring from under the hood. Rose screaming, the car door flying open, her stumbling out, her coat on fire. Edward ran outside, put out the flames, called 999, held Rose while she shook and cried, told her she was safe, told her he had her, told her everything would be okay. It was perfect, exactly what he wanted, except Rose was hurt. Not seriously, but hurt. Burns on her hands, bruises from falling, shock that would last for days. He hadn't meant for that, hadn't calculated it correctly. The bomb had been stronger than intended, but he couldn't admit that, couldn't say anything. So he played the terrified husband, the protective father, the man whose family was under attack. The police investigation was thorough this time. A bomb was different than dead sheep or broken windows. This was attempted murder. They brought in specialists, bomb technicians, detectives from the regional unit. They examined the device, traced the materials, started building a profile of who would do this. And slowly, carefully, they began to notice things that didn't add up. The bomb had been planted by someone who had access to Rose's car. The car had been locked overnight, but there were no signs of forced entry. The wiring was amateur but showed some knowledge of how ignition systems worked. Someone who understood cars, like a farmer who maintained his own equipment. They looked at the anonymous threats, analyzed the handwriting, compared it to Edward's, found similarities, not definitive, but suggestive. They looked at his finances, found the material purchases, different stores, but all traced back to his credit card. He'd been smart, but not smart enough. They interviewed neighbors, asked about the incidents, started to see a pattern. Every incident happened when Edward was alone or conveniently nearby. Every incident served to gain sympathy. Every incident benefited him in some way. The lead detective was a woman named Inspector Sarah Miller. She'd been working rural crimes for 15 years. She'd seen farmers driven to desperation before, seen what people did when pride and poverty collided. She started to suspect Edward was behind his own terror campaign. But she needed proof. She brought him in for a friendly chat. Just routine. Just need your help understanding the timeline. Edward came willingly, confident. Sure, he was smarter than these country cops. Miller was patient. She asked about his finances, about the farm, about his relationship with Peter Langford, about the affairs. She knew about the affairs, had done her homework. Edward was rattled but kept his composure. Admitted things were tough. Said yes, he'd made mistakes with other women. But that didn't mean he was bombing his own wife's car. Miller agreed. Seemed sympathetic. Then she showed him the evidence. The material purchases. The handwriting analysis. The timeline that showed he was always alone when incidents occurred. Showed him how it all pointed to one person. Him. Edward denied it. Got angry. Accused the police of victim blaming. Of not doing their jobs. Of letting the real criminal get away. But Miller stayed calm. Told him they'd search his property. They'd find more evidence. It was over. The only question was whether he admitted it now or after they'd built an even stronger case. Edward called a lawyer. Refused to say anything more. Was released while the investigation continued. The search warrant came through 3 days later. Police swarmed the farm. Searched every building. Every vehicle. Every tool shed. They found the burner phone hidden in the barn. Found receipts for the bomb materials in the workshop. Found a notebook where Edward had been planning incidents. Writing scripts for himself. Creating his own narrative. They arrested him that afternoon. Charged him with making threats, animal cruelty, criminal damage, and attempted murder for the bomb. Rose was devastated. Not because her husband was arrested, but because she finally understood. Everything that had happened. Every sleepless night. Every moment of terror. It had all been him. The man she'd married. The father of her children. He'd terrorized his own family. Burned her. Traumatized their children. For what? For sympathy? For attention? For money? She filed for divorce that week. Took the children and moved in with her sister. Refused to speak to Edward. Refused to visit him in custody. Was done in a way that felt final and absolute. But Edward's plan had one more horrible twist. Because while he was manufacturing fear to save his farm, he'd made real enemies. Peter Langford had been planning to make another offer for Edward's land. A better offer. One that included keeping Edward on as a manager. Giving him a salary. Letting him stay involved. But Edward's campaign of fake threats had poisoned that. Peter had started getting real threats. Accusations that he was behind the attacks on the Hales. That he was trying to drive them off their land through terror. His reputation was damaged. People in town looked at him with suspicion. Peter was furious. His lawyer sent cease and desist letters. Threatened legal action. But that didn't satisfy him. He wanted Edward to hurt the way he'd been hurt. Wanted revenge. The exact sequence of events is unclear. But on a Tuesday night, while Edward was out on bail awaiting trial, Peter drove to the Hale farm. He was drunk, angry, carrying a cricket bat. Edward was in the barn, working late, trying to keep the farm running even though Rose had left. Even though his reputation was destroyed. Even though everything was falling apart. He heard Peter's car. Came out to see who was there. Peter got out of his car. Started yelling. Accusations. Threats. How Edward had ruined him. How he was going to pay. Edward tried to calm him down. Said they could talk. Work this out. But Peter wasn't interested in talking. He swung the bat. Caught Edward in the shoulder. Edward stumbled back. Peter advanced. Swung again. Edward grabbed a shovel leaning against the barn wall. They fought. Both of them drunk and angry and full of rage. The fight moved inside the barn. Peter was bigger. Stronger. The cricket bat was a more effective weapon than the shovel. He hit Edward in the ribs. In the leg. Edward fell. Peter stood over him. Raised the bat for another blow. Edward grabbed a pickaxe from a tool rack. Swung it wildly. Caught Peter in the side. Peter fell. Blood spreading across his shirt. He tried to get up. Couldn't. Collapsed on the barn floor. Edward panicked. He'd just stabbed a man. Maybe killed him. Self-defense or not, this was bad. Really bad. His trial was coming up. He was already facing attempted murder charges. Now this. He checked Peter's pulse. Still alive, but barely. Bleeding out. Needed an ambulance. But if Edward called one, he'd go back to jail immediately. Would be charged with attempted murder again. would spend the rest of his life in prison. So he made a choice that would define him forever. He watched Peter bleed, watched him struggle, watched him die, did nothing. Then he staged it, made it look like Peter had attacked him, like they'd fought, like Edward had been defending his property. He injured himself. Shallow cuts on his arms, a blow to his own face that split his lip, made it look convincing. Then he called 999, said someone had attacked him, that he'd defended himself, that the attacker was dead. He didn't mention it was Peter. Let them discover that. Let them think he didn't know. Played the shocked victim one more time. The police arrived, found Peter's body, found Edward, injured, covered in blood. It looked like self-defense at first, until they started examining the scene more carefully. The blood patterns were wrong. Peter had been bleeding in one spot, unmoving, for too long before he died. The wounds on Edward's arms were too shallow, too controlled. The blow to his face had been self-inflicted. You could tell by the angle, and the timeline didn't work. Edward claimed Peter had attacked him right after arriving. But Peter's car engine was cold, had been there for at least an hour, which meant the fight happened earlier, which meant Edward had time to call for help, time to save Peter's life. He'd chosen not to. Inspector Miller handled the investigation. She was thorough. She built a case that showed Edward had killed Peter, not in immediate self-defense, but after Peter was incapacitated, after the threat had ended. That made it murder. Edward maintained his innocence, said Peter had attacked him, that he'd defended himself, that everything happened fast, that he was confused and scared and traumatized. But the forensics told a different story. The blood spatter analysis showed Peter had been bleeding on the ground, not fighting, when he died. The injury patterns showed Edward had inflicted his own wounds after Peter was already down. The timing showed he'd let Peter die when he could have saved him. Edward was charged with murder. His lawyer tried to argue it down to manslaughter, to diminished capacity, said Edward was under incredible stress, had been pushed to his breaking point, was not thinking clearly. But the jury saw through it, saw a man who'd been lying for months, who'd terrorized his own family, who'd killed a neighbor rather than face consequences. They convicted him of murder. The judge sentenced him to life with a minimum of 25 years before parole. Edward Hale sits in prison now. His farm was sold at auction. Rose and the children live in a small flat 2 towns over. The children don't visit, don't write, don't acknowledge he exists. The community in Ashcombe Vale has mostly moved on. Some people still talk about what happened, about how they trusted Edward, how they never saw it coming, how a desperate man can become a monster so gradually that no one notices until it's too late. The lesson here is different than Elena Ward's story. Elena was a victim of long-term psychological abuse. Edward was a perpetrator. But both stories show how lies compound, how deception builds on itself until the only way out seems to be more deception, more violence, more crime. Edward could have sold the farm, could have accepted Peter's offer, could have started over somewhere else. But his pride wouldn't let him. So he created a narrative where he was the victim. And when that narrative threatened to collapse, he killed to preserve it. That's the thing about lies. They require constant maintenance. Each lie needs another lie to support it. And eventually, the weight becomes unsustainable. The whole structure collapses. But by then, the damage is done. Edward destroyed his family, destroyed his reputation, destroyed a man who was trying to help him, all because he couldn't admit failure, couldn't accept that sometimes life doesn't go the way we planned, that sometimes letting go is the only way to survive. If you're still with us, I want you to take a moment. Make sure you've liked this video. Subscribe to the channel. These stories matter. They show us the darkness that can exist in ordinary lives, the warning signs we need to watch for, in ourselves and in others. Now let's shift again, from rural England to suburban North Carolina, from financial desperation to romantic obsession, from a crime born of pride to one born of desire that curdled into murder. Captain Daniel Cross had been in the military for 12 years when he met Rachel. He was 32. She was 28. He was on leave, visiting his hometown of Redwood Point. She was working as a therapist at a local clinic. They met at a mutual friend's wedding, danced twice, exchanged numbers. Their courtship was brief. Daniel had to return to his base in 3 weeks. Rachel visited him there. They spent intense weekends together. Long conversations about life and meaning and what they wanted from the future. Daniel proposed after 6 months. Rachel said yes. They married in a small ceremony before his next deployment. Military marriages are hard. Everyone knows this. The separations, the stress, the constant moving, the way combat changes people. Daniel and Rachel knew it going in. Thought they were prepared. Thought love would be enough. It wasn't. Daniel deployed 3 times in the first 5 years of their marriage. Long deployments. Dangerous ones. He flew helicopters in combat zones. Came home different each time. Quieter. More withdrawn. Dealing with things he couldn't talk about and Rachel couldn't understand. Rachel tried to be supportive, but she was lonely. She'd moved to be near Daniel's base. Didn't know anyone. Had to rebuild her practice from scratch. Spent months at a time alone while Daniel was overseas. It was harder than she'd expected. Lonelier. More isolating. She started spending time online. Chat rooms. Forums for military spouses. Places where she could talk to people who understood what she was going through. It was innocent at first. Just conversation. Just connection with people who got it. Then she met Evan Cole. He was active military too. Stationed at the same base as Daniel. They'd served together, though not closely. Evan knew Daniel casually. Knew he was married. Knew Rachel was off limits. But Evan had been watching Rachel for a while. At base events. At the commissary. He thought she was beautiful. Thought she deserved better than a husband who was always gone. Thought maybe he could be what she needed. He reached out to her through the online forum. Casual at first. Just another military spouse offering support. They started messaging privately. Then texting. Then talking on the phone. Rachel told herself it was just friendship. Just someone to talk to. Daniel was deployed again. Would be gone for 8 months. She needed human connection. This was harmless. Except it wasn't harmless. Evan wanted more than friendship. And Rachel, lonely and neglected and tired of being strong all the time, wanted it too. The affair started physically when Daniel was 6 months into his deployment. Evan came to Rachel's house. They talked. They drank wine. They crossed the line they'd been approaching for months. Rachel felt guilty immediately. Told herself it was a mistake. That it would never happen again. But it did happen again. And again. Whenever Daniel was away, which was most of the time, Rachel and Evan were together. They were careful. Met at her house or in hotels. Avoided being seen together in public. Deleted their messages. Evan told her they had to be smart. Had to protect themselves. If Daniel found out, there would be consequences. For both of them. Rachel agreed. She loved Daniel. Or thought she did. Or had loved him once. She was confused. The affair made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. But it also made her feel terrible. Guilty. Like she was betraying everything she'd promised. Daniel came home from deployment. Rachel ended things with Evan. Told him it was over. That she needed to focus on her marriage. Evan seemed to understand. Said he cared about her. Wanted her to be happy. Would respect her decision. But he didn't respect it. He kept texting. Kept calling. Kept showing up places Rachel would be. He said he needed to see her. Just talk to her. Make sure she was okay. Rachel told him to stop. That this was too much. That he needed to leave her alone. Evan became obsessive. He drove past her house. Watched her. Followed her. Rachel was frightened, but didn't tell Daniel. Couldn't tell Daniel. Because then she'd have to explain why Evan was fixated on her. Would have to confess the affair. She tried handling it herself. Blocked Evan's number. Avoided places she knew he'd be. Told him in no uncertain terms to stop contacting her. But Evan didn't stop. He escalated. Started sending angry messages. Saying she'd used him. That she owed him. That she couldn't just throw him away. Rachel should have gone to the authorities. Should have told Daniel. Should have done something. But she was paralyzed by shame and fear. So she did nothing. Just hoped Evan would eventually move on. He didn't move on. He festered. His obsession grew. And somewhere in his increasingly disturbed mind, he decided that the problem wasn't Rachel. The problem was Daniel. Daniel was the obstacle. The reason Rachel wouldn't be with him. If Daniel was gone, Rachel would see that Evan was the one she really wanted. Evan started planning. Researching. Figuring out Daniel's schedule. Where he went. When he was alone. How to make it look like something it wasn't. Daniel had recently left active duty. Taken a job with a private contractor doing flight instruction. He worked regular hours now. Came home every night. He and Rachel were trying to rebuild their marriage. Going to counseling. Having date nights. Pretending everything was fine, even though Rachel carried the weight of her infidelity every day. On a Wednesday morning in March, Daniel left for work at 7. He had a full day of flight scheduled. Students to train. Paperwork to file. Normal day. He kissed Rachel goodbye. Told her he'd be home by 6. She watched him drive away. Had no idea it was the last time she'd see him alive. Daniel stopped at a gas station on his way to the airfield. Security footage shows him pumping gas, going inside to pay, coming back out, getting in his car, driving away. Normal. Unremarkable. What the footage doesn't show is Evan, waiting in the parking lot, watching, following. Daniel took the back roads to the airfield. Less traffic. Prettier drive. A route he took most days. The roads were empty that morning. No witnesses. Perfect for what Evan had planned. Evan pulled alongside Daniel's car at a stoplight. Daniel glanced over. Recognized Evan from the base. Nodded. Normal military courtesy. The light turned green. Both cars accelerated. Then Evan pulled ahead. Cut Daniel off. Forced him to stop on the shoulder. Daniel got out of his car. Probably confused. Maybe thinking there'd been an accident. Maybe Evan had car trouble. Evan got out too. He had a gun. Borrowed from a friend who'd never know it was used for murder. He raised it. Daniel saw it. Put his hands up. Started to speak. Evan fired. 4 shots. Center mass. Military training. Efficient. Deadly. Daniel fell. Evan stood over him. Fired once more. Made sure he was dead. Then he got back in his car and drove away. Left Daniel bleeding out on the side of the road. Left him for someone else to find. A jogger found the body 20 minutes later. Called 911. Police arrived. Secured the scene. Tried to understand what had happened. There'd been no robbery. Daniel's wallet and phone were still in his pockets. His car was intact. This wasn't road rage. This was execution. The investigation moved fast. Military personnel murdered in broad daylight was high priority. They pulled Daniel's phone records, his emails, his social media, built a picture of his life. Found nothing that suggested enemies. Nothing that explained why someone would want him dead. Then they talked to Rachel. Asked about Daniel's relationships, his work, his friends. She told them everything was fine. He was loved, respected, had no conflicts. She was crying, devastated, playing the grieving widow. But something about her demeanor bothered the lead detective. She seemed genuinely upset, but also nervous, like she was hiding something. He pressed gently, asked if there was anything else, anything at all that might help. Rachel hesitated. Then she told them about Evan, about the affair, about his obsessive behavior, about how she'd cut things off and he wouldn't let go. She was sobbing now, saying she should have told someone, should have warned Daniel. This was her fault. The detective listened carefully, asked for details, names, dates, times. Rachel gave him everything. She knew. Deep down, she knew. Evan had done this. Had killed her husband because she wouldn't leave him. They brought Evan in for questioning. He denied everything. Said yes, he knew Rachel. Yes, they'd been friendly. But just friends. Nothing more. He was shocked to hear about Daniel. Devastated. They'd served together. But the police dug deeper. Pulled Evan's phone records. Found thousands of messages to Rachel. Found internet searches for how to get away with murder and untraceable guns. Found financial records showing he'd paid cash for ammunition the week before Daniel died. They searched his car. Found traces of Daniel's blood. Found gunshot residue. Found receipts from the gas station where he'd followed Daniel that morning. The evidence was overwhelming. Evan had planned this. Stalked Daniel. Killed him in cold blood. And thought he'd get away with it. They charged him with first-degree murder. Premeditated. Calculated. No plea deal. No possibility of anything less than life in prison. But they weren't done. Because Rachel was involved too. Not in pulling the trigger, but in creating the situation. In conducting an affair with someone who became dangerous. In not warning Daniel. In keeping secrets that got her husband killed. The prosecutor debated charging her as an accessory. She hadn't known Evan planned to kill Daniel. But she'd known he was unstable. Known he was dangerous. And she'd done nothing. They offered her a deal. Testify against Evan. Tell everything she knew. In exchange, they wouldn't charge her. She'd walk away free. Technically innocent. Rachel took the deal. Because what choice did she have? She'd lost her husband. Lost her reputation. Lost everything. Going to prison wouldn't bring Daniel back. Wouldn't undo what she'd done. Would just add more pain to a situation already overflowing with it. The trial was brutal. Rachel testified for 3 days. Told the jury about the affair. About Evan's obsession. About the messages and the stalking and the threats. About how she'd been too ashamed to tell anyone. About how her silence had killed her husband. She cried through most of it. The defense attorney tried to paint her as the real villain. Said she'd manipulated Evan, led him on, driven him to madness with her lies. But the jury didn't buy it. Evan was a grown man. He'd made choices. Rachel's affair didn't justify murder. Evan was convicted, sentenced to life without parole. He showed no remorse. Told the judge he'd loved Rachel, that she was worth it, that he'd do it again. The judge looked disgusted. Said love didn't excuse murder. Nothing excused murder. Rachel left the courthouse a free woman. Legally, but not actually free. She was destroyed. Her practice was gone. Her reputation ruined. Everyone in Redwood Point knew what she'd done. Knew she'd cheated on her husband. Knew he'd died because of it. She moved away. Changed her name. Tried to start over. But you can't really start over when you're carrying that much guilt. When you know your choices led to someone's death. When you wake up every morning and remember that your husband died because you couldn't stay faithful. Daniel Cross's family tried to sue Rachel. Wrongful death. They argued she bore responsibility, that her actions directly led to Daniel's murder. The case went to civil court. Rachel had no money to fight it. She settled, agreed to pay what she could, which wasn't much, but it was acknowledgement. Legal recognition that yes, she bore some blame. Daniel's parents never recovered from losing their son. He was their only child. A good man. A military hero. Killed because his wife had an affair and the other man couldn't let go. The lesson in this story is about how small betrayals can have massive consequences. Rachel didn't kill Daniel, but her choices created the circumstances that led to his death. She ignored warning signs, kept secrets, tried to manage an unstable situation without help, and it cost her husband his life. Could she have known Evan would turn murderous? Maybe not, but she knew something was wrong, knew he was fixated, knew she needed help, and she chose shame over safety, chose to protect herself over protecting Daniel. That choice killed him as surely as if she'd pulled the trigger herself. This story should make us uncomfortable, because it's easy to judge Rachel, easy to say she's a terrible person who got what she deserved. But the truth is more complicated. She made mistakes, had an affair, handled it poorly, but she didn't deserve to lose her husband. And Daniel certainly didn't deserve to die. Evan is the murderer. Evan made the choice to kill. Rachel's infidelity doesn't change that. But it does show how our choices ripple outward. How secrets can become dangerous. How what we hide can hurt people we never meant to harm. Before we move to the next story, take a moment. Breathe. These stories are heavy. That's intentional. We're not here for entertainment. We're here for understanding. For learning. For making sure we recognize these patterns when we see them in our own lives. Now let's shift tone completely. From adult relationships to something even more disturbing. A story where the victim couldn't speak for himself. Where violence happened inside a family and the law struggled to respond appropriately. Victor Lynn was 53 years old. He'd built a successful career in commercial real estate. Made good money. Provided well for his family. On paper, he looked like the American dream. Immigrant who worked hard and succeeded. Married. 2 kids. House in a good neighborhood in Crestview Hills, New York. But inside that house, behind closed doors, Victor was a tyrant. He'd always been controlling. His wife, May, had known that from the beginning. He made all the major decisions. Managed the money. Decided where they lived, what cars they drove, where the kids went to school. May had accepted it. That was how things were in her family growing up. Men led. Women supported. It wasn't ideal, but it was normal. The violence started small. A slap when May questioned a decision. A shove when she disagreed. Victor would apologize afterward. Say he was stressed from work. Promise it wouldn't happen again. May believed him. Wanted to believe him. But it did happen again. And again. The violence escalated. Slaps became punches. Shoves became beatings. Victor had a temper that erupted without warning. Something as small as dinner being late or the house not being clean enough could trigger an explosion. May learned to walk on eggshells. To anticipate Victor's moods. To be perfect so she wouldn't provoke him. But perfection was impossible. Victor always found something wrong. Always had a reason to be angry. Always justified his violence as her fault. Their children, Aaron and his younger sister Emily, grew up watching their father beat their mother. They learned to hide during the fights. To stay in their rooms. To pretend they didn't hear the screaming and the crying and the sound of fists hitting flesh. Aaron tried to intervene once when he was 12. Victor was hitting May in the kitchen. Aaron ran in, yelled at his father to stop. Victor turned on him instead, hit him hard across the face, told him to mind his own business. This was between husband and wife. Aaron learned to stay out of it after that. Learned that he couldn't protect his mother. That trying only made things worse. He felt guilty about it. Weak. Like he was failing her. But he was a kid. What could he do against a grown man who was bigger and stronger and didn't care about hurting people? The police were called to the Lynn house 17 times over 8 years. Neighbors called. Teachers called after seeing bruises on the kids. Once, May herself called during a particularly bad fight. But every time police arrived, the same thing happened. Victor would be calm, charming, would explain it was a misunderstanding. A loud argument. Nothing physical. May would back him up. Say she was fine. That things had just gotten heated, but everything was okay now. The police, they fought. Father and son. Years of rage and fear and hatred pouring out in violence. May screamed at them to stop. Emily came out of her room. Saw what was happening. Started crying. Aaron was winning. He was younger. Faster. Angrier. He hit his father repeatedly. Drove him back. Made him bleed. Victor realized he was losing. Went to the kitchen. Came back with a knife. Told Aaron to back off. That he was still the father. Still in charge. Aaron saw the knife. Should have backed down. Should have called police. Should have done anything except what he did next. He pulled out a gun. Aaron had bought it illegally 3 weeks earlier from someone he'd met online. He'd hidden it in his room. Carried it with him sometimes. Just in case. Just in case his father finally went too far and Aaron needed to protect his mother. Tonight was that night. Victor saw the gun. His expression changed. Fear. Then anger. Then something cold and calculating. He told Aaron to put it down. That he wouldn't shoot his own father. That he didn't have it in him. Victor was wrong. Aaron pulled the trigger. Once. Twice. 3 times. Center mass. Just like he'd learned from YouTube videos. Victor fell. Dropped the knife. Blood spreading across his chest. He looked surprised. Like he couldn't believe this was happening. That his own son had shot him. He died on the living room floor while May screamed and Emily sobbed and Aaron stood there with the gun in his hand, realizing what he'd done. Aaron called 911 himself. Said he'd shot his father. That it was self-defense. That his father had been attacking his mother with a knife. That he'd had no choice. The police arrived. Found Victor dead. Found May and Emily traumatized. Found Aaron calm. Eerily calm. Like he'd been expecting this moment for years, and now that it had arrived, he knew exactly what to do. They arrested Aaron. Read him his rights. Took him to the station. He was 17. Still technically a juvenile. But he'd committed murder. With a gun he shouldn't have had. In a situation that was legally complicated. The prosecutor initially charged him as an adult. First-degree murder. Argued this was premeditated. That Aaron had bought the gun weeks earlier. That he'd been planning this. That it wasn't self-defense. It was execution. The defense argued differently. Said Aaron was protecting his mother. That Victor had been abusing the family for years. That the police had failed to intervene. That Aaron had done what no one else would do. Stop the violence. Permanently. The case became a media sensation. Split public opinion. Some people saw Aaron as a hero. A son who protected his mother when the system wouldn't. Others saw him as a murderer. A kid who'd gone too far. Who'd taken the law into his own hands. May testified at the trial. Told the jury about years of abuse. About Victor's violence. About calling police and nothing changing. About living in fear. About watching her son grow up in a house full of terror. She cried through the entire testimony. Said she didn't want Aaron to shoot his father. But she understood why he did. The prosecution brought in experts. Said May could have left. That there were shelters. Resources. Options besides murder. That Aaron could have called police instead of shooting. The defense countered with their own experts. Said abused women often can't leave. That the psychology of domestic violence traps victims. That Aaron had watched police come and go 17 times. Why would he think calling them would help? The jury deliberated for 3 days. Couldn't reach a unanimous verdict. Some thought Aaron was guilty of murder. Others thought he'd acted in defense of his mother. The judge declared a mistrial. The prosecutor had to decide whether to retry the case. It would be expensive, time-consuming, and might end in another hung jury. So they offered a deal. Dropped the murder charge. Aaron pleads guilty to illegal gun possession. Federal charge. Mandatory minimum sentence. Aaron took the deal. Pleaded guilty. Was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. Would be out at 27 if he behaved. Would have his life ruined. But he wouldn't be in prison forever. May and Emily visited him. Told him they were proud. that he'd save them, that Victor would have eventually killed May, that Aaron had done the right thing even if the law said otherwise. But Aaron wasn't sure. Sitting in prison, missing his teenage years, missing college, missing everything normal kids got to experience. Was it worth it? Had he saved his mother? Or had he just traded one kind of prison for another? This story is uncomfortable because there's no clear villain except Victor, and he's dead. Aaron committed a crime, possessed an illegal gun, shot his father. Those are facts. But the context matters. The years of abuse matter. The system's failure matters. Should Aaron have shot Victor? Legally, no. Morally? That's harder to answer. He could have called police. But they'd been called 17 times and nothing changed. He could have waited for his father to actually stab someone. But by then, it might have been too late. He could have done nothing. But watching your mother get beaten while you stand by destroys something inside you. There are no good answers here. Just a family destroyed by violence. A father dead, a son in prison, a mother and daughter free but traumatized. Everyone lost. Even though the immediate threat ended, the damage persists. The legal system struggles with cases like this. How do you punish someone for protecting their family? How do you excuse illegal gun possession and homicide even when the shooting feels justified? How do you weigh years of abuse against a moment of violence? Aaron will get out of prison eventually. He'll be a convicted felon. Will have trouble finding work, building a life, moving forward. But he'll be alive. So will his mother. So will his sister. That has to count for something. Victor Lynn's family tried to sue Aaron and May. Wrongful death. They argued Aaron should have called police instead of shooting. That May should have left years ago. That Victor, despite his flaws, didn't deserve to be killed in his own home. The case was dismissed. The judge ruled that given Victor's history of violence, given the knife he was holding, given the reasonable fear Aaron had for his mother's life, the shooting fell within the realm of defense. Maybe not legally perfect, but understandable. Victor's family was outraged. Said the system had failed to see their son and brother as a victim. That everyone focused on the abuse he'd committed and ignored that he was dead. That his children would grow up without a father because a teenager decided to be judge and executioner. They're not entirely wrong. Victor was abusive, but he was also human. Also someone's son. Also a father, however terrible. His death, while it ended the immediate violence, created its own trauma. Emily lost her father. We'll always carry that. We'll always wonder if there was another way. There probably was another way. But when you're 17 and you've watched your mother get beaten for years, and the police keep leaving without helping, you stop believing in other ways. You start believing the only way to stop violence is with more violence. And that's a terrible thing for a child to learn. But it's what Aaron learned. What the system taught him through its failure to protect his family. Take a breath. We're moving into the last story now. The darkest one. The one that's hardest to hear. But it's important. Because this is the story of how systems fail children. How adults meant to protect can become predators. How silence becomes complicity. If you need to step away, do it now. This one is rough. Noah Reed was 5 years old. He liked dinosaurs. Liked playing with toy cars. Liked when his grandmother made chocolate chip cookies. He was a normal kid. Happy. Energetic. Full of the kind of joy that only small children have before the world teaches them to be careful. His mother, Megan, was 26. She'd had Noah young. Raised him mostly alone. Noah's father hadn't stuck around. Sent money sometimes, but wasn't involved. Megan did her best. Worked 2 jobs. Kept Noah fed and clothed. Loved him in her own overwhelmed way. When Noah was 3, Megan started dating Caleb Moore. Caleb was 32. Worked construction. Seemed nice enough. Took Megan out. Paid for things. Made her feel special. She thought he might be the one. Thought Noah could finally have a father figure. Caleb moved in after 6 months. At first, things were good. He played with Noah. Helped with bills. Took some pressure off Megan. She thought this was going to work. Thought they were becoming a real family. Then Caleb started showing his real self. He was controlling. Told Megan what to wear. Who she could see. When she could leave the house. Megan noticed, but made excuses. He was just protective. Just cared about her safety. Just wanted what was best. Caleb didn't like Noah's grandmother, Diane. Thought she was interfering. Told Megan she needed to set boundaries. Stop letting Diane just show up whenever she wanted. This was their family. Their home. They needed privacy. Megan agreed. Started limiting Diane's visits. Made excuses why she couldn't come over. Why Noah couldn't spend weekends at her house anymore. Diane was hurt, but tried to respect Megan's relationship. Tried to give them space. That space allowed something terrible to grow. Caleb started disciplining Noah. Hard. He'd hit the boy for small things. For being too loud. For making messes. For acting like a normal 5-year-old. Megan saw it. Told Caleb to go easier. That Noah was just a kid. Caleb said he was teaching Noah respect. Teaching him to behave. That Megan was too soft. Too permissive. Noah needed a man's influence. Needed structure. Megan should have left then. Should have thrown Caleb out. Should have protected her son. But she was afraid. Afraid of being alone. Afraid Caleb would hurt her if she challenged him. Afraid of admitting she'd made a mistake bringing this man into their lives. So she stayed. And she watched Caleb hurt her son. And she did nothing. Noah changed. Became quiet. Withdrawn. Stopped playing as much. Stopped laughing. His teacher noticed. Called Megan. Said Noah seemed unhappy. Asked if everything was okay at home. Megan said everything was fine. Noah was just adjusting to having a stepfather. It was a big change. He'd be fine. But Noah wasn't fine. He was being abused daily. Physically. Emotionally. And his mother was allowing it. Choosing Caleb over him. Choosing her own fear over her son's safety. Diane tried to see Noah on his 6th birthday. Showed up with presents. Knocked on the door. Caleb answered. Told her they were busy. That Noah was sick. That she should call first next time. Then he shut the door in her face. Diane was upset. Called Megan later. Megan said she was sorry. That Caleb was just stressed. That they'd bring Noah by soon. But they never did. Diane kept calling. Kept texting. Asking to see her grandson. Megan kept making excuses. After a while, Diane realized she was being deliberately shut out. That Caleb had isolated Megan and Noah from her. From everyone. She thought about calling child services. But what would she say? That her daughter's boyfriend was mean? That she wasn't allowed to see her grandson as often? Would anyone take that seriously? Would they investigate? Or would Megan just cut her off completely? Diane hesitated. And in that hesitation, disaster unfolded. On a Tuesday evening in October, Noah did something small. Spilled juice on the floor. Or forgot to put his toys away. Or talk back. Something Caleb decided deserved punishment. Caleb hit Noah. Hard. Harder than usual. Noah fell. Hit his head on the coffee table. Started crying. Caleb told him to shut up. Hit him again. Noah's crying got weaker. Then stopped. He wasn't moving. Wasn't responding. Something was very wrong. Megan was there. Saw it happen. Saw her son lying on the floor. Not moving. Not breathing right. She should have called 911. Should have done something. But Caleb said no. Said if they called for help, they'd both go to prison. Said Noah would be fine. Just needed to sleep it off. Said they'd check on him later. Megan listened. Chose to believe Caleb over her own maternal instinct. Chose to protect herself instead of her dying son. Noah died that night. 5 years old. Killed by a man his mother brought into their home. Killed while his mother stood by and did nothing. Megan and Caleb panicked. They couldn't report Noah's death without explaining how it happened. Couldn't take his body to a hospital without questions being asked. So they made a decision that ensured their damnation. They hid Noah's body. Wrapped it in trash bags. Buried it under the house in the crawl space. Then they told everyone Noah had gone to stay with relatives out of state. That he'd be back eventually. Diane asked to speak to Noah on the phone. Megan said he was having such a good time, he didn't want to be bothered. That he'd call when he was ready. Diane didn't fully believe it, but what could she do? She didn't even know which relatives Noah was supposedly staying with. Months passed. Diane kept asking about Noah. When was he coming home? Could she visit him? Could she at least see pictures? Megan always had excuses. The relatives were strict about visitors. Noah didn't like talking on the phone. He was fine. Stop worrying. But Diane was worried. Deeply worried. Something felt wrong. She couldn't shake the feeling that Noah was in danger. Or worse. She tried driving to Megan's house unannounced. Caleb answered. Said Megan wasn't home. That she needed to stop showing up without calling. That they'd get a restraining order if she kept harassing them. Then he slammed the door. Diane went to the police. Said she hadn't seen her grandson in months. That she was being prevented from seeing him. That something felt wrong. The officers were sympathetic but limited in what they could do. There was no custody arrangement giving Diane rights. If Megan didn't want her mother seeing Noah, that was her choice. They did a welfare check. Went to Megan's house. Asked about Noah. Megan said he was with relatives. Gave a name and address. Seemed calm. The officers noted it and left. They didn't follow up. Didn't verify the address. Didn't check if Noah was actually there. Just filed the report and moved on. Diane was desperate now. She hired a private investigator, gave him the address Megan had provided, asked him to verify Noah was really there. Safe. Alive. The investigator called the relatives. They said they hadn't seen Noah, hadn't seen Megan in years, didn't know anything about a visit. They were confused why anyone would think Noah was with them. The investigator reported back to Diane. Noah wasn't where Megan said he was, which meant Megan was lying, which meant something was very, very wrong. Diane went back to the police with this information. This time they took her seriously. They got a warrant, went to Megan's house with child services, demanded to see Noah. Now, no more excuses. Megan broke down, told them Noah was gone, that there had been an accident, that she didn't know where he was. She was lying, still protecting Caleb, still trying to avoid the full truth. But Caleb cracked under questioning, told them Noah was dead, that it had been an accident, that they'd panicked and buried him, that he was under the house. The forensics team found Noah's remains. 5 years old, dead for 8 months, hidden like trash, treated like garbage, by his own mother and the man she chose over him. The autopsy showed blunt force trauma, broken ribs, old fractures that had healed wrong, evidence of prolonged abuse. Noah hadn't died from one bad hit. He died from cumulative violence, from months of being beaten by Caleb while Megan stood by and watched. They arrested both of them, Megan and Caleb, charged them with murder, child abuse, concealment of a corpse, a list of charges that would ensure neither of them saw freedom for decades. Diane was destroyed. She'd known something was wrong, had tried to save Noah, but she'd been too late, too hesitant, too respectful of boundaries that should never have been respected when a child's life was at stake. She blamed herself, should have pushed harder, should have called child services sooner, should have broken down that door and taken Noah herself, should have done anything except trust that Megan would protect her own child. But Megan hadn't protected Noah. She'd sacrificed him, chosen a man over her son, let that man beat her child to death, and then hid the evidence. The trial was devastating. The prosecution presented evidence of systematic abuse, showed photos of Noah's body, the breaks, the bruises, the evidence of suffering that had gone on for months, showed text messages where Megan complained to Caleb about Noah being difficult and Caleb responding that he'd handle it. The defense tried to argue Megan was also a victim, that Caleb had controlled her, that she was afraid for her own life, that she didn't participate in the abuse, just failed to stop it. But the jury wasn't sympathetic. Megan had options. Could have left, could have called police, could have sent Noah to live with Diane. Instead, she'd chosen to stay with Caleb, to let him hurt her son, to help cover up his murder. Both were convicted. Caleb got life without parole. Megan got 30 years. She'd be 56 when she got out, if she survived that long. Prison is hard on people who hurt children. Noah's case sparked outrage. Questions about why child services hadn't done more, why the police welfare check had been so cursory, why Diane's concerns had been dismissed, why a child could disappear for 8 months before anyone really looked for him. There were investigations, reviews of procedures, promises to do better. But none of that brought Noah back. None of that fixed the failures that led to his death. Diane became an advocate, started speaking about the warning signs of child abuse, about how families need to push past awkwardness when something feels wrong, about how respecting privacy matters less than saving lives. She said if she could go back, she'd have called child services the first time Megan cut off contact, would have demanded to see Noah every week, would have made herself a nuisance until someone paid attention, would have done anything to save him. But she didn't know then what she knows now, didn't understand how bad things were, thought Megan was just going through a phase, thought Caleb would calm down, thought it would work out. It didn't work out. Noah died, and Diane has to live with that, with the knowledge that she might have saved him if she'd been braver, more persistent, more willing to cause conflict. Noah's story is the hardest because he was the most vulnerable, couldn't defend himself, couldn't call for help, couldn't escape, was completely dependent on adults who betrayed him. His mother should have protected him. That's the fundamental obligation of parenthood. Protect your child, above your own comfort, your own fear, your own desires. Nothing matters more than keeping your child safe. Megan failed that obligation spectacularly. She didn't just fail to protect Noah. She actively enabled his abuse, helped hide his murder, chose her abuser over her victim. There's no redemption in that. No forgiveness that can cover that kind of betrayal. Caleb is what he is. A violent man who killed a child. Monster is an easy label. Accurate too. But focusing only on Caleb misses half the story. Megan's complicity is what made Noah's death possible. Her silence, her inaction, her choice to prioritize Caleb's approval over Noah's life. The system failed too. Multiple opportunities to intervene. Multiple warnings ignored. The police welfare check should have been more thorough. Should have demanded to see Noah in person. Should have followed up when the relatives said he wasn't there. But ultimately, the blame lies with Megan and Caleb. They made choices. Every day, they chose to hurt Noah. Chose to hide his death. Chose themselves over him. Noah deserved better. Deserved a mother who loved him more than she feared being alone. Deserved a home without violence. Deserved to grow up. To go to school. To play with dinosaurs. To eat his grandmother's cookies. To be 6 and 7 and 8 and alive. He didn't get that. He got 5 years of life. The last few spent in fear and pain. Then death. Then months in a crawl space while his mother lied about where he was. That's the nightmare of child abuse. Children can't leave. Can't advocate for themselves. Can't fix their situation. They're trapped. Dependent on adults who are supposed to love them. And when those adults fail, when they become the threat instead of the protection, children have nowhere to go. We have to be Noah's advocates. All of us. We have to watch for signs. Listen when children seem frightened. Take concerns seriously even when they're inconvenient or awkward. Because children like Noah are counting on us. Counting on someone to notice. To care. To save them. Noah's grandmother did notice. Did care. But she didn't save him. She tried, but not hard enough. Not soon enough. And she'll live with that forever. Learn from her regret. If you see something, if you feel something is wrong with a child's situation, push past your hesitation. Call child services. Call the police. Make yourself a problem until someone investigates. Yes, you might be wrong. Yes, you might cause awkwardness. But if you're right, you might save a life. One child saved is worth 100 awkward conversations. Worth being wrong 99 times. Worth every uncomfortable moment and strained relationship. Because children like Noah can't save themselves. They need us. And we can't fail them the way Noah was failed. After Noah's case made news, Diane received letters from other grandparents. Other family members who'd been shut out of children's lives by controlling partners. Who'd worried but not acted. Who'd wondered if they were overreacting. Who'd discovered too late that they weren't. Some of those children had died like Noah. Others survived but were deeply traumatized. A few were saved when someone finally pushed past fear and called for help. The stories varied, but the pattern was consistent. Isolation. Control. Adults choosing abusers over children. Systems failing to intervene until it was too late. Diane started a foundation in Noah's name. It provides resources for family members worried about child abuse. Helps them understand when to call authorities. How to document concerns. What to do when access is cut off. It can't bring Noah back, but it might save other children. That has to be enough. Megan sits in prison now. She'll be there for at least 25 years before parole is considered. She claims she's reformed. That she understands what she did. That she'll spend the rest of her life making amends. But how do you make amends for letting your child die? For hiding his body? For lying about where he was while he decomposed under your house? There's no amends sufficient for that. No apology that covers it. No amount of time that balances the scales. Caleb doesn't claim remorse. Says Noah was a difficult child. That he was trying to discipline him. That things got out of hand. That it was an accident. He's lying, of course. The autopsy showed systematic abuse. This wasn't one bad moment. This was sustained violence against a helpless child. Neither of them will likely leave prison alive. And that's probably appropriate. They stole Noah's life. They should lose their freedom. It's not equivalent, but it's something. Noah is buried now in a proper grave. Next to Diane's late husband, Noah's grandfather. The headstone has a dinosaur on it. Noah's favorite. Diane visits every week. Brings flowers. Talks to him. Tells him about the foundation. About the children being saved because people learned from his death. Apologizes for not saving him. She knows he can't hear her. But she talks anyway. Because what else can she do with the guilt and the grief and the love that has nowhere to go? Noah's story is where we end because it shows the ultimate failure. The destruction of the most innocent. The betrayal by the people meant to protect. The silence that killed. These 5 stories are different in their specifics. Different people. different locations, different motives, but they share themes: control, manipulation, violence hidden behind normalcy. People who looked fine on the surface but were dangerous underneath. Systems that should have protected victims but failed. Warning signs that went unheeded. Elena Ward was isolated and manipulated until her ex-husband and daughter murdered her. The warning signs were there. The repeated court filings. The alienation of children. The financial abuse. People saw it, but no one stopped it until Elena was dead. Edward Hale created his own nightmare. Terrorized his family to maintain a lie. Killed a neighbor to preserve his fake victim status. The warning signs were his lies. The inconsistencies in his story. The convenient timing of incidents. Someone with more skepticism might have caught on sooner. Might have saved Peter Langford's life. Daniel Cross died because his wife had an affair with an unstable man. The warning signs were Evan's obsessive behavior. His refusal to accept no. His stalking. Rachel saw them but didn't tell anyone. Didn't warn Daniel. Chose shame over safety. Victor Lynn abused his family for years. Police were called 17 times. 17 opportunities to intervene. To arrest. To protect. They didn't. Aaron Lynn shot his father because the system failed. The warning signs were constant. Visible. Documented. And ignored until a teenager decided the only solution was murder. Noah Reed was beaten to death by his mother's boyfriend while his mother watched. His grandmother saw warning signs. Isolation. Bruises. Fear. She worried, but didn't act aggressively enough. By the time anyone forced the issue, Noah had been dead for months. 5 stories. 5 deaths. Dozens of opportunities for intervention. Most of them missed. Some of them ignored. All of them tragic. What do we learn from this? What do these stories tell us that matters? First, violence in families is common. More common than we want to believe. Behind doors that look normal. In houses that look fine. Among people who seem okay. It's happening. Right now. In your neighborhood. Probably multiple homes. You just can't see it because violence hides well. Second, controlling behavior is a warning sign. Isolation. Financial manipulation. Turning people against each other. Making someone dependent. These aren't quirks. They're abuse tactics. They're preparation for violence. If you see someone being isolated from friends and family, that's a red flag. Pay attention. Third, the legal system struggles with family violence. It's built for stranger crimes. For clear victims and clear perpetrators. But family violence is complicated. Victims protect abusers. Evidence is hidden. People lie to police. Courts move slowly. By the time the system catches up, damage is done. Sometimes people are dead. Fourth, children are the most vulnerable. They can't leave. Can't report. Can't protect themselves. They need adults to see and act. If you're worried about a child, act. Call child services. Call police. Be wrong if you have to. Being wrong is better than being silent while a child suffers. Fifth, affairs and obsession are dangerous combinations. If someone can't accept the end of a relationship, that's not romantic. That's threatening. If someone stalks or harasses or refuses to take no for an answer, that's not love. That's danger. Don't hide it. Don't handle it alone. Get help. Tell people. Because obsession can turn lethal quickly. Sixth, perfect victims don't exist. Elena stayed in court battles with her abuser. Rachel had an affair. May didn't leave her abuser. These don't make them responsible for what happened to them. Don't make them less deserving of help. Victims make mistakes. Have flaws. React imperfectly to impossible situations. That doesn't mean they deserve violence. Seventh, perpetrators often seem normal. Thomas was a systems engineer. Edward was a farmer. Rachel was a therapist. Caleb worked construction. Victor was a businessman. They had jobs, families, community connections. They didn't look like monsters. That's how they got away with it for so long. We expect evil to look obvious. It usually doesn't. Eighth, people don't want to see. Don't want to believe their neighbor is abusive. Their coworker is dangerous. Their family member is violent. So they explain it away. Make excuses. Convince themselves everything is fine. Until someone dies. Then suddenly everyone knew something was wrong. But no one acted when action could have helped. Ninth, the system improves slowly. After each of these cases, there were reviews. Changes to procedures. Promises to do better. And maybe things did get better. Maybe some children were saved because Noah died. Maybe some women escaped because Elena was murdered. But improvement is cold comfort to the dead. To the families destroyed. We need to do better before the next tragedy. not after. 10th, silence protects abusers. Every time someone sees something and says nothing, abusers gain power. Every time someone suspects abuse and talks themselves out of reporting, victims lose a chance at escape. Every time someone prioritizes politeness over safety, violence continues. We have to be willing to be uncomfortable, to risk being wrong, to make people angry by asking questions. Because silence kills, and comfort isn't worth someone's life. These aren't easy lessons. They require us to be suspicious of normalcy, to question what we see, to act on instinct even when we're not sure. That's uncomfortable. Goes against social training that says mind your business. Don't cause problems. Trust that everything is fine. But everything isn't always fine. Sometimes everything is very wrong. And the only thing stopping that wrongness from becoming tragedy is someone noticing. Someone caring enough to act. That someone needs to be you. And me. And everyone who hears these stories and understands they're not entertainment. They're warnings. They're education. They're calls to vigilance. Watch for isolation. Watch for control. Watch for fear masquerading as respect. Watch for children who seem too quiet, too compliant, too careful around adults. Watch for partners who monitor phones, control money, cut people off from support systems. Watch for people who can't accept no, who escalate when rejected, who confuse obsession with love. And when you see these things, act. You don't have to be certain. You don't have to have proof. You just have to care enough to make a call, to ask a question, to offer help, to create an opportunity for someone to escape. Most of the time, you'll be wrong. The person you're worried about will be fine. The situation will be less serious than it seemed. You'll feel awkward, but that's okay. Awkward is survivable. Death isn't. And sometimes, you'll be right. You'll intervene at exactly the right moment. You'll save someone. You'll be the reason a story doesn't end in tragedy. You'll be the person Elena needed. The person Noah needed. The person who noticed and acted and made a difference. That's worth a lifetime of awkward moments. Worth being wrong 1,000 times. Worth every uncomfortable conversation and strained relationship. Because you might save a life. And saving one life justifies everything. These stories stay with us. They should stay with us. Not as nightmare fuel or entertainment, but as reminders. Reminders that violence is real. That it happens to people who didn't deserve it. That systems fail. That silence enables abuse. That we have responsibilities to each other that go beyond minding our own business. Elena Ward's daughters are growing up without their mother. They're in therapy. They're dealing with the knowledge that their father and sister murdered the woman who gave them life. That's trauma that will last forever. Maybe they'll heal. Maybe they'll find peace. But they'll never get their mother back. Rose Hale is rebuilding her life. She divorced Edward. Changed her name. Moved far from Ashcombe Vale. Her children are older now. They don't talk about their father. Don't visit him. He's effectively dead to them. That's survival, not healing. But sometimes survival is enough. Daniel Cross's parents go to his grave every week. They're in their 70s now. They thought they'd have grandchildren by now. Thought Daniel would outlive them. Instead, they're burying their only son. Murdered by a man who was jealous of what Daniel had. What he'd earned. What he deserved. Aaron Lynn will be released from prison in a few years. He'll be 27. Have a felony record. Limited job prospects. A life shaped by violence he experienced and violence he committed. He saved his mother. But he lost his freedom. His youth. His future. Was it worth it? He'll spend the rest of his life wondering. Diane Reed has her foundation. Has other people's grandchildren she's helping to save. But she still goes to Noah's grave every week. Still talks to him. Still apologizes. Still wishes she'd been braver. Been faster. Been better. She saved children after Noah died. But she couldn't save Noah. And that's what she'll carry forever. These are the people left behind. The survivors. They're not okay. They're coping. Processing. Continuing. But they're not okay. Violence broke something in them that will never fully heal. That's the real legacy of these crimes. Not the dead, though the dead matter. But the living who have to keep going. Keep surviving. Keep carrying weight that shouldn't be theirs. We owe them something. We owe them attention. We owe them action. We owe them the willingness to see what they saw too late. To act where they failed to act. To save the people they couldn't save. That's not guilt. That's responsibility. Collective responsibility to protect each other. To notice. To care. To intervene. Because we're all connected. What happens to Elena matters to all of us. What happened to Noah matters to all of us. Their deaths diminish us. Their suffering implicates us. Their stories demand response. That response isn't just nodding and feeling sad. It's changing behavior, watching more carefully, trusting instinct, calling authorities when something feels wrong, having hard conversations, being willing to be wrong, being willing to cause problems if it means keeping someone safe. It's understanding that privacy isn't absolute, that respecting boundaries matters less than protecting lives, that sometimes forcing your way into someone's business is the most loving thing you can do, even if they hate you for it, even if it damages relationships, even if it costs you something, because the alternative is worse. The alternative is Elena, murdered in her own home. Edward, creating terror to hide failure. Daniel, executed on a roadside. Victor, killed by his own son. Noah, beaten to death and hidden under a house. The alternative is tragedy that could have been prevented. We can't prevent all violence. Some people are determined to hurt others. Some situations are too hidden to spot. Some victims are too isolated to reach. We'll never stop all of it, but we can stop some of it. And some is worth the effort. So watch, notice, act. Trust your instinct when something feels wrong. Don't talk yourself out of reporting because you're not sure. Let professionals decide if concern is warranted. That's their job. Your job is just to care enough to call. And if you're in a situation like the ones described here, if you're being isolated or controlled or hurt, know that it's not your fault. Know that leaving is hard but possible. Know that help exists. Hotlines, shelters, legal resources, people who will believe you and support you and help you escape. You don't deserve violence. You deserve safety. You deserve autonomy. You deserve a life without fear. And you can have that. It takes courage and planning and support, but you can have that. Don't give up. Don't accept that this is just how life is. It isn't. It doesn't have to be. And if you're worried about someone else, reach out. Tell them you're concerned. Offer help. Don't be pushy, but be available. Let them know they're not alone. That if they ever need help leaving, you're there. Sometimes that's all someone needs to hear. That they have an option. A way out. A person who cares. These stories are dark. They're supposed to be dark. Because the reality they reflect is dark. Violence in families is dark. Control and manipulation are dark. Children's suffering is dark. People dying unnecessarily is dark. We don't fix darkness by pretending it doesn't exist. We fix it by looking at it, understanding it, learning from it, acting on that learning. That's what these stories are for. Not to scare you, though they might. Not to entertain you, though they're compelling. But to educate you, to prepare you, to give you the knowledge you need to recognize danger and respond appropriately. Elena's story teaches about psychological manipulation and parental alienation. Edward's story teaches about desperation and deception. Daniel's story teaches about affairs and obsession. Victor's story teaches about domestic violence and system failure. Noah's story teaches about child abuse and the cost of silence. 5 stories, 5 lessons, dozens of warning signs, all of them potentially life-saving if we pay attention, if we apply what we've learned, if we're brave enough to act when action is needed. So as we close, remember these people. Remember Elena, who just wanted to be a good mother and died for it. Remember Rose, who survived a bomb meant to kill her. Remember Daniel, who served his country and was murdered by someone who claimed to love his wife. Remember May and her children, who lived in terror for years. Remember Noah, who was 5 years old and deserved so much better. Remember them not as statistics or cautionary tales, but as people. Real people who lived and suffered and died or survived. People with hopes and fears and families. People who mattered, who still matter. And remember that their stories aren't unique, aren't rare, aren't isolated incidents. They represent patterns that repeat constantly. Right now, somewhere, another Elena is being manipulated. Another Edward is creating lies. Another Daniel is being targeted. Another Victor is beating his family. Another Noah is being abused. We can't save all of them, but we can save some. And that has to be enough. Has to be worth the effort. Has to motivate us to do better. Be better. Watch more carefully. Act more quickly. Care more deeply. Before we go, I want you to do something. If this video helped you understand these patterns better, if it made you think about violence differently, if it gave you tools to recognize danger, then like this video. Subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment about where you're from and what time you're watching. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Not for my benefit, for the benefit of the next potential victim. Because the more people who understand these patterns, the more people who are willing to act, the fewer tragedies we'll have, the more lives we'll save, the better we'll do at protecting each other. And if you're struggling with something similar to these stories, if you're in danger or know someone who is, there are resources. National Domestic Violence Hotline, child abuse hotlines, local police, shelters, therapists, lawyers, people trained to help. Use them. Don't wait. Don't hope it gets better. It usually doesn't get better on its own. It gets worse. Get help. Accept help. Be help. That's how we break these cycles. That's how we prevent the next Elena, the next Daniel, the next Noah. By refusing to be silent. By refusing to ignore. By refusing to accept that this is just how things are. Things can be different. Should be different. Will be different if we make them different. And that starts with understanding. With awareness. With willingness to see and act on what we see. These stories are heavy. I know that. They're supposed to be. Because what they describe is heavy. But knowledge is power. Understanding is protection. Learning from others' tragedies can prevent our own. So take these stories seriously. Think about them. Let them change how you see the world. Let them make you more vigilant, more willing to question, more ready to act. Let them save someone. That's all we can ask of tragedy. That it teaches, that it warns, that it motivates change. Elena and Daniel and Noah didn't die to entertain us. They died because systems failed and people didn't act when they should have. Let's honor them by doing better, by being the people they needed, by saving the people who need us now. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the difficulty of these stories. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. Thank you for caring enough to hear about people you never met. People whose suffering matters even though it doesn't directly affect you. That compassion, that willingness to care about strangers, is what changes things. Violence thrives in indifference, in the attitude that if it's not happening to me, it's not my problem. But that's a lie. It is our problem. All of it. Because we're human beings living in communities. What happens to one of us affects all of us. Elena's murder diminished her community. Noah's death shocked an entire town. Daniel's execution traumatized everyone who knew him. We can't wall ourselves off from others' suffering. Can't pretend that if we don't look at it, it doesn't exist. It exists whether we acknowledge it or not. The only question is whether we respond or ignore. Whether we help or turn away. I hope these stories convinced you to respond. To help. To be the person who notices. Who calls. Who offers support. Who refuses to accept that violence is inevitable or acceptable or none of your business. It is your business. Protecting people is everyone's business. Stopping abuse is everyone's responsibility. Saving lives is a communal effort. We do it together or we don't do it at all. And yes, it's hard. It's uncomfortable. It requires courage and effort and willingness to be wrong. But the alternative is unacceptable. The alternative is more Elenas, more Daniels, more Noahs, more families destroyed, more survivors carrying guilt, more preventable deaths. We can do better. We must do better. These stories show us how. They show us the warning signs, the patterns, the failures, the moments when intervention could have changed everything. Learn from them. Apply those lessons. Be ready. Because somewhere, right now, someone needs you to notice, needs you to care, needs you to act. You might be the only person who sees what's really happening, the only one who questions, the only one willing to make the call that saves a life. Don't waste that opportunity. Don't talk yourself out of it. Don't prioritize your comfort over someone else's safety. Be brave. Be uncomfortable. Be wrong if you have to. But be someone who acts. That's how we honor Elena and Daniel and Noah and all the others whose stories end in tragedy. By making sure there are fewer tragic endings. By being the intervention they never got. By saving the people we can save. The Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-7233. The Child Abuse Hotline is 1-800-422-4453. Local police are always an option. Shelters exist in every city. Legal aid is available. Help is real. Help is accessible. Help works. If you're being hurt, call. If you know someone being hurt, call. If you suspect something is wrong, call. Let professionals investigate. Let them determine if intervention is needed. Your job is just to care enough to report. That's enough. That's everything. And if you're someone who hurts people, who controls or manipulates or abuses, stop. Get help. Go to therapy. Attend anger management. Do whatever it takes to stop harming others. Because the pattern doesn't have to continue. You can change. You can be different. You can break the cycle that maybe started with how you were raised or what you experienced. You can choose to be better. But you have to choose. Have to admit there's a problem. Have to want to change. Have to do the work. No one can do it for you. And if you don't, eventually, you'll end up like Thomas or Caleb or Evan. In prison. Life destroyed. Responsible for unthinkable harm. Don't let that be your story. Choose differently now while you still can. These are the final thoughts I want to leave you with. Violence isn't inevitable. Abuse isn't acceptable. Control isn't love. Manipulation isn't care. Obsession isn't devotion. And suffering in silence isn't strength. It's a trap. A dangerous trap that can end in death. If you remember nothing else from these stories, remember that. Remember that it's okay to speak up. Okay to ask for help. Okay to leave. Okay to report. Okay to prioritize your safety and your children's safety over everything else. You don't owe abusers your loyalty. Don't owe them your silence. Don't owe them your life. You matter. Your safety matters. Your life matters. And people care. People want to help. People will help if you let them. Don't believe abusers who say no one will care or believe you or help you escape. That's a lie designed to keep you trapped. The truth is help exists. Hope exists. Escape is possible. And for those of you who aren't in abusive situations, who are watching from safety, your role is to be that help. Be that hope. Be that escape route. Be vigilant. Be caring. Be willing to get involved. Be the reason someone makes it out alive. That's the message. That's the point. That's why these stories matter. Not because they're dramatic or shocking or entertaining, but because they're educational, motivational, potentially life-saving. If even one person watching this recognizes a pattern and acts on it, these stories serve their purpose. If even one person in danger hears this and realizes they need to leave, need to call for help, need to save themselves, these stories serve their purpose. If even one potential abuser hears this and decides to change, to get help, to stop the pattern, these stories serve their purpose. That's the goal. Not views or likes or comments, though those help spread the message. The goal is saving lives, preventing tragedies, making the world a little bit safer, a little bit kinder, a little bit better at protecting its most vulnerable members. I believe we can do that. I believe that awareness creates change, that education prevents violence, that knowing the patterns helps us recognize danger early, that understanding manipulation helps us resist it, that learning from others' mistakes helps us avoid our own. These stories are dark. They're painful. They're hard to hear. But they're necessary. They're important. They're potentially life-saving. So I'm grateful you listened. Grateful you stayed. Grateful you cared enough to hear about people you never met and probably never will meet. That compassion matters. It's what makes communities work. What makes people look out for each other. What creates safety nets that catch people before they fall. What saves lives. So carry these stories with you. Not as burdens, but as knowledge. As tools. As warnings. As motivation. Use them to inform how you see the world, how you interact with people, how you respond when something feels wrong. Trust your instinct. It evolved to keep you safe. When it tells you something is wrong, listen. Don't rationalize. Don't explain it away. Don't convince yourself you're overreacting. Listen and act. Call authorities. Offer help. Ask questions. Do something. Because doing something might save a life. And saving a life matters more than anything. More than being wrong. More than being uncomfortable, more than damaging relationships or causing awkwardness or any other consequence you can imagine. A life saved justifies everything. A child protected is worth all the effort. A person helped out of abuse validates every uncomfortable moment. That's the truth these stories teach. That's the lesson worth learning. So as we close, I'll say again, like this video if it helped you understand these patterns better. Subscribe to the channel to see more content like this. Comment where you're from and what you're thinking. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Spread the message. Spread the awareness. Spread the possibility that we can do better. And most importantly, act. In your own life. In your community. In your family. Watch for the warning signs these stories highlighted. Respond when you see them. Be the intervention. Be the help. Be the reason someone's story doesn't end in tragedy. That's all I can ask. That's all these victims would ask if they could. Be better than the people who failed them. Be braver than the people who saw danger and did nothing. Be the person who notices and acts and saves. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. Thank you for being willing to sit through difficult stories in service of understanding and awareness. You matter. Your attention matters. Your potential to help matters. Now go into the world with this knowledge. Let it inform your choices. Let it guide your actions. Let it make you more vigilant and more willing to get involved. Let it save someone. That's the purpose. That's the point. That's why we tell these stories. Not to traumatize or scare, but to educate and motivate and prepare. To create a world where fewer people suffer. Where fewer children are abused. Where fewer victims are murdered. Where fewer families are destroyed. We can create that world. One act of awareness at a time. One call to authorities. One offer of help. One person saved. That's how change happens. Not in grand gestures, but in small, brave decisions to care about others. To notice. To act. To be better. So be better. For Elena. For Daniel. For Noah. For all the victims whose names we don't know, but whose suffering is just as real. For the people who are being hurt right now and need someone to see. To care. To help. Be that someone. Be the difference. Be the reason tomorrow is safer than today. That's all we can ask. That's everything. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. Now go make a difference. Good night.